Yo, what up, slackers? For today's book review, I want to talk about the biography written by Alan Axelrod on General George Smith Patton Jr. Can't forget the junior there. One of the greatest generals that Americans have ever known, and a wonderful, legendary World War II hero. As one of the most famous or infamous as well as legendary military commanders in the history of the United States Army, Patton led a everything we know about Patton and his life is on the battlefield. This guy, he's such a character that so if this guy, just think of it this way, if this guy worked on Wall Street today, or if this guy worked on Wall Street in the 90s, then he would have been that big swinging dick. If he fought in the ring, he would have been Mike Tyson. If he played on the football field as a quarterback, he would have been Tom Brady. So, this is the guy with that type of type A personality that he puts his action through how he envisions the strategy on the battlefield should be carried out, and he executes exactly just that. And the underlying result is that the battle has been won, and the war was in the favor of the Allies. So, with this type of talent, or if you call it with this type of character, wherever you put him, he's definitely gonna be able to, make some waves and to be able to get it done for you. And luckily, in history, he's on our side. So, Patton is one of the most celebrated heroes in World War II, and let's get into the book and to see how he was described and how his story comes together. So Patton, or George Smith Patton Jr., he was born in, he was born in 1885 to a family of military leaders. His grandfather was actually a Southern Civil War hero, and his father was also a graduate. Just like his grandfather, his father was also a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, and that's where Patton attended as well before he ended up in West Point. And that, if you don't know what West Point is, that's basically the it's kind of like the rite of passage if you want to go on and become a military general in the U.S. Army, in any part of the U.S. military. So this is the military academy for the U.S. Army, and I believe this is in upstate New York, and it's by some beautiful mountains and waters, and this is where we train our generals. So after graduating from West Point, Patton had held various posts and being involved in military operations, including one of the famous ones was that he chased a Mexican guerrilla leader around near the Sierra Madre Mountains. So I guess this is the type of training that he has undergone or undertaken to get himself ready for war, because nothing gets harder. It doesn't get any harder than chasing a bunch of guerrilla fighters in the mountains, because you don't know. First of all, why is it so hard to fight like guerrilla? Because you don't know who these guys are. These guys could either, a guy who comes up to you, he can either be a civilian or he could be a guerrilla fighter. So you gotta keep your 100% attention on what you're doing, and to be able to understand that, it's also understanding part of the human nature. Although you want to keep a kind heart, but you're in action. You're in the field of whatever you call it. In you're in a war, and you should be vigilant at all times, and to be able to keep that vigilance against everything that is around you. So I guess that's what got him ready for war. And then the next phase of his development was in World War One. I guess at this point he was a young man, because this was in the early 1915 or so. And since Patton was born in 85, so he was around 30 at this time. And he worked under General John J. Blackjack Pershing. And he basically ran the training for tank warfare in Europe, Patton, I mean. And he was the person who set up the first tank brigade in the European battlefield during World War One. He was wounded during the war, and he also won some awards for his bravery. Kind of like, why does this sound so similar to Hitler? Because Hitler was also wounded and during World War One, and also awarded for his bravery, and so did Patton. And and after the war, Patton, he undertook different military positions amongst the ranks, and also went up in ranks quite rapidly. Well, it kind of helps to befriend some important people, such as the Army Chief of Staff, General Douglas MacArthur. I think you know who that is, so I'm not gonna. Well, maybe we should also do an episode on MacArthur, because he was also a character in himself. And Patton also became an acquaintance, as well as a personal friend to the Supreme Allied Commander later in World War II, Dwight David Eisenhower, and who was basically the leader of all Allied forces in Europe during the Second World War. So, and then there is the theater of World War II for Patton, and this is really his stage, and where he had the opportunity to shine, and he did. We can really think of this in three different phases. So when U.S. got involved in the Second World War, basically the British and the French, so mainly we're talking about the British, has lost continental Europe, meaning Nazi Germany has conquered all of France, as well as a large part of North Africa, along with the rest of Europe. So really, the stage that is set for three different regions, three different areas where the Allied forces would need to conquer, need to defeat Nazi Germany. So the first one is North Africa, and this is kind of like where a lot of the I wouldn't call it scrimmages, but it would be a lot of the initial fightings took place, and then we progress further north from North Africa, crossing the Mediterranean onto Sicily and Italy. So this is the second phase where Patton was able to show his military genius on the battlefield. And then at the end, not at the end, but as a third stage, it's the European theater. So that's when D-Day has taken place, and the invasion in Normandy was successful, and the Allies have occupied a foothold on continental Europe, and they were pushing Germany from the west, whereas the Russians in the Red Army were pushing the Germans back from the east side, and they were trying to basically, push the Germans back all the way until they meet in Berlin in the middle. And here, Patton really showed his genius tactics, and his genius in his absolutely insightful understanding of the battlefield. Kind of like how Nick Saban understands the football field and how, or Lou Holtz, depends on who's your favorite college football team, and also similar to how Jose Mourinho or Jurgen Klopp understands the soccer field. It's Patton's. I would say it's his understanding combined with his some balls and guts, so to really be able to execute the strategy and to inspire his forces with his personal character as well as his bravery. Because I mean, this guy did fight in World War I. If it's some dude who's never been in a war before and then just telling his troops to go ahead and charge ahead at those machine guns that's coming at you, and the bullets flying at you, it's a different story. But this guy, he was there. He's been there, done that, and he is really setting an example for his troops on how to conduct yourself as well as how to conduct a war with balls. So Patton, let's talk about North Africa. So here, basically, right after the United States entered the World War II, in terms of so this is right after Pearl Harbor in 1942, and the initial fighting was between the initial fighting was really between Patton, or I should say, the third army. Is that right? I believe this was the Third Army of the United States to against the Vichy French. So the Vichy is a puppet government set up by the Nazis because they basically defeated France, and when Charles de Gaulle fled to England, the Nazis they elected a different leader, and so the Vichy is a government, a nominal government of France, but it's really part of the Axis, and so Vichy French was basically the main battle forces against Patton in North Africa, in I think areas of Libya, Morocco, and Algeria there. So so even before Patton landed in North Africa, there's a really funny anecdote where he trained his soldiers to get them ready for desert warfare in an area that is 200 miles east of LA. That's in California. So, Californians, if you want to experience what desert warfare is like, just drive south 200 miles. So, like 3 hours west of LA. And you will be able to see how Patton trained 60,000 U.S. troops to get them ready for battle in North Africa in the desert of California. And this area, it was later known as Little Libya. Today, Libya is not what it was, sort of a prosperous country that it once was, but Little Libya is still there. So go visit there and to see if you can find some traces of the legendary general and his troops have left during their training. Okay, so now Patton is in North Africa, and they basically were able to defeat the Vichy forces under something called the Operation Torch. The code name is really cool because for every theater, for every battle, they have like a special code name, and in North Africa, it's called Operation Torch. And so they landed in North Africa on the 8th of November in 1942. They quickly defeated the Vichy French forces, and then they basically took up Morocco, and then Patton held a party at Casablanca. That must have been a pretty good party too, because it's actually called a conference, the Casablanca Conference, and it was also attended by the U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as well as the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, along with a myriad of other international leaders from the Ally side. Yeah, so Patton really made some headlines there in Operation Torch. And then things got a little serious and got a little harder because the Germans were like, oh, wait. So, okay, so the French were pretty useless in North Africa. So let's take this in our own hands and show the U.S. how we do our battle warfare. So I think our desert warfare. So here, I don't think it's the infamous or the famous, actually. This guy, although he fought for Nazi Germany, but his achievements is legendary. The guy's name is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. So he was nicknamed the Desert Fox, and I don't think he was personally involved in the battle in North Africa against Patton. Maybe he was, but actually he was. So it says right here that Rommel's troops they pursued and attacked the Americans in the Battle of Kasserine Pass, and causing more than 3,000 casualties in the U.S. troops, and also capturing more than 3,000 American soldiers. So that was a heavy loss. So here, Patton, I think Patton actually wasn't directly involved in this battle, and well, that was a mistake on the part of personnel assignment on the U.S. Army side, probably by Dwight Eisenhower. But Patton was quickly sent there to make things right after the defeat by Rommel. So so he took command of the U.S. Second Corps, and which had bad morale. So Patton, he basically retrained them, and he imposed a bunch of fines for infractions, and he basically disciplined these soldiers and improved their morale. And in mid-March of the next year, they were able to defeat the Germans. I don't know if Rommel was there, but they were able to defeat him at El Guitar. Does that mean the guitar? In Spanish? Interesting. I have no idea. Yeah, so that was the end of the North Africa campaign for Patton. Then the battle shifts over to further north to Sicily along with Italy, because this was kind of like the soft belly of Europe, where the German forces wasn't so concentrated on defending like they are defending the French coast. This is all before D-Day, of course, because the Allies aren't ready to land in Europe or in the French coast just yet. So the Italy operation, or they call it Operation Husky, took place first. And here, that's where Patton had his first, quote, interaction with the British Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery. And this guy is also, a character, quite a character. And so basically they originally, they also didn't see each other eye to eye, of course, given the fiery personality of these two big swinging dicks. So Montgomery was originally assigned to invade Sicily from the east, while Patton goes from the north shore of Sicily. So that's Palermo, however say in Italian. In Italian, Palermo. But then Montgomery didn't like that quite as much. So he asked the chief of staff of Dwight Eisenhower, General Walter Smith, Beetle, that's his nickname, Beetle, to change the plan so he would come from the British, or him, like the British under his control would come from the northeast, whereas Patton would come in from the east coast of Sicily and in command of the 7th U.S. Army. And Patton said, you know what? If that's what you want, knock yourself out. He didn't, this is not what he liked, but he was okay with the plan. And yeah, so they were successful in the landing in Sicily. This took place on July 10th of 1943. And once again, Patton was ready to roll. So and then, in the ensuing weeks, Patton really showed the Italian resistance forces from Mussolini, as well as he also showed Montgomery, who's the daddy, because he basically swept through the Italian resistance by, just even with just parts of his forces, and he kind of like broke off part of his forces to attack Messina, and then he spared some of it to go to capture Palermo. And then so it's just amazing how he made it look so easy, right? So this guy, without, even without outnumbering the enemy, he was able to maneuver his troops on the battlefield at will. And it's the battle that took Messina as well as Palermo just shows the ingenious tactics and just gut feelings of Patton, of General Patton, on how a battle should be conducted and how it should be won. And he later boasted that what he has done in Sicily should go down in history as a damn near perfect example of how to wage war. So that concludes the end of the Sicily campaign. And then in between that and the main European theater, there was some drama that was mainly due to the brash manners of Patton, of how he conducted himself. So when he was visiting a hospital for the wounded, he saw a guy who was basically the guy doesn't seem like he was injured. So he asked, "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" And the guy told him, "Yeah, maybe I just can't take it." Patton heard that, and he took a full swing and slapped the guy and kicked the guy out of the medical facility and told him never to come back, because that was a disgrace to him, because this guy showed nothing but cowardice in a time where such such fear for death or fear for getting injured, there's no room for that. So, that's where his sort of asswipe type A personality totally came out. Although, later it was found that this guy had a high fever and a diarrhea. So he's been shitting his pants for the last several weeks. And today we would probably call it coronavirus, but back then they didn't know what it was. And obviously you can't put a guy like that back onto the battlefield, onto the front line. So Patton later apologized, but these types of actions really marred his or put a blemish on the reputation of Patton. Even though he was a war hero and he was loved by the media, he was a darling to the media, because Americans love to hear about how Patton effortlessly swept through North Africa and Sicily. But, they can sort of turn the other way when they found out that this dude was such a douche. And he was a bad-tempered, ill-tempered motherfucker. So, as long as these guys were stationed at the right spot, little harm was done. So yeah, he is not gonna be. He's not gonna make a good politician. Let's put it that way. And yeah, so then it comes the Normandy invasion. But unfortunately, Patton was not involved in Normandy because because of his bad conduct off the field, off the battlefield. Dwight Eisenhower decided to ask Patton to go as a decoy, to be a part of a decoy, because the Germans have heard of Patton and they're afraid of him, and so they put Patton to feint an attack on what is this place called, Pas-de-Calais, because this was, as opposed to Normandy, where that's where actually the Allies landed. Pas-de-Calais was where was the closest point between England and France, so that conveniently made the Germans believe that's where the Allies would decide to land when they do their counterattack, and Patton was there. So he wasn't, he wasn't part of the Normandy action, but that didn't matter because as soon as Normandy was captured, Patton would get his opportunity again to be back in action. But just before that, Patton was slapped with another bad behavior, bad misdemeanor off the field. He when he was doing kind of gave like a public speaking event at where was this? This was at a welcome club to the soldiers. He said that the Americans and the British would rule the world after World War II, which greatly offended the Soviets because, as we know, the Soviets were there and they were very relevant after the war. Although Patton knew that the Russians are going to be there, he kind of just, he kind of cold shouldered them in a way, and he belittled them. So then, the Russians didn't take this very lightly, and as a kind of a gesture of political, as a political gesture, so he was basically reprimanded by Dwight Eisenhower, and he was this close to be sent back to be sent back home to the United States by Eisenhower, but luckily he wasn't. And then Patton was finally back in action after D-Day. So D-Day was June 6th of 1944, and after the landing site was secured for the Allies, Patton's U.S. Third Army landed, and he basically, put on some sunscreen and put on his wind goggles and started marching toward Berlin, and that was his goal. So here he basically took the blitzkrieg strategy of the Nazi Germans when they're invading Poland, means a really fast attack, and you're just sweeping through your enemies without them even being prepared. So that's what Patton did as well. I guess his his model was advance, attack, advance, and attack again formula. And it worked really well, kind of like giving the Germans a taste of their own medicine. And he quickly captured this place called Avranches in France, and then they further moved out. They moved further east to capture Lorient and Brest. These are, I guess, all towns in the north side of France, and yeah. So, by the way, this operation. So the operation what was let's see. What was the D-Day operation? Okay, D-Day. D-Day was called Operation Overlord. That was just the initial part of the counterattack. But then the actual operation Allied operation was called Operation Cobra to capture France as well as to push Germans back into Germany and to retreat into Berlin. So Operation Cobra was initially led by Bradley, General Bradley, instead of General Patton, but Patton quickly, took things in his own hands and just, just basically with his rapid attacks and numerous victories, he basically took it back. He took the command back from Bradley, and he liberated basically his forces. It's called the Eighth. No, it's not the Eighth. Whatever. His Eighth Corps. I don't understand the relationship between the Eighth Corps and the Third Army, but his army is called the U.S. Third Army, and they liberated most of the northern part of France, up to the river Ori, and there the German resistance came back in terms of making things so much harder for the Allies, because now the Allies things has been going rapidly, smoothly for the Allies for a bit, but then the German resistance toughened, and this is where if you're not careful, then you're going to suffer a lot of casualty. So by December of 1944, indeed, Eisenhower called this phase a victory fever, because they were now having some hard time advancing further east. And Patton, he knew fully well. He knew it well. He anticipated that the Germans, they haven't given up on the war, and they were only going to come back harder. So, and he did what he does the best. He just took everything he's got and threw it at the German defense. On December 16th of 1944, Hitler attacked Bastonia in Luxembourg at the Battle of the Bulge. Luxembourg is a small country, and I am actually not sure whether Bastonia is part of Luxembourg. But the Battle of the Bulge, I believe today there is still a monument that is a way for people to remember the events that has taken in Luxembourg during World War II, and it's a nice place to visit, and I think you should if you have an opportunity to do so, make sure you stop there and to take a look at. Although Luxembourg was not like what do you call it? Ravaged by is that a word? Ravaged by the war, but it still showed how much supposedly neutral country, well, a country wanted to stay neutral. No, I think I got this wrong. Luxembourg was not a country that wanted to stay neutral. But in any case, back to the battle. Bradley, General Bradley was still in overall command, and he asked, because Bastonia was kind of under siege by Hitler, or I think it was taken. So Bradley asked Patton whether he could do something to help the situation, and Patton said, "Hell yeah!" And then he was asked, "How soon can you do something about this?" Patton said, "How about now?" And he did just that. He led a counterattack in the snow and ice. They marched 40 miles into German territory and drove Germans 40 miles back to give them, a reminder that, the Allies are for real, and they basically, their end is near. So, the Germans fear Patton for a reason, right? It's because of things like occasions like this where Patton says, all right, that's enough is enough. Let's you know, zip our pants, buckle our belts, and just show them what we're made out of. And then he were able to do that. So he sliced through the German defense after that. And yeah, so that basically to all the way to the point of the surrender on May 7th in 1945 by the Germans. Patton really played an instrumental role in making it so much smoother for the Allies, and because of his mighty power on the battlefield, the Allies probably have suffered less casualty than they otherwise would have had the Germans put up a stronger defense at the very end. And then on August 10th of 1945, everything came to an end when Hiroshima and Nagasaki was bombed, and Japan also surrendered. So that marks the end of World War II. What's also legendary was that Patton, after the war, Patton, he's stationed in the American sector in the Ally-occupied Germany, and he was in charge of the denazification process. However, it was going too slowly, and the reporters asked Patton why. Patton said, this is more like a, the Nazi question's more like a Democratic and Republican Party fight. So this enraged Eisenhower, and he was relieved of his of this post. Patton was relieved of his post, and but he, of course, there's nothing he could do. He can only say okay, and he was frustrated. And a few days later, not just a few days, maybe a couple months later, he he was still in Germany, he was injured in a car accident, and he was paralyzed from the completely from the shoulder down. And 13 days after the accident, Patton passed away on December 21st of 1945. So this guy, basically, his life was on the battlefield, and he left nothing. He left nothing on the court or on the battlefield. He, at the end of the war, this probably was the best ending that he could have had. Just imagine what this dude would be like in a peacetime society. He would probably be like an alcoholic, wife-beating motherfucker in the U.S. South. Some of that typical redneck shit that we see in TV shows and movies, where a lot of those are portrayed. The way that his character was, you just don't see him do too well in a peacetime situation. So it might not have been a bad thing that Patton died in Germany right after the war, before his reputation has even a further opportunity to be tarnished by his by how badly he handles the media and how badly he dislikes politics. So this guy was born to be a soldier and a general, and he did that for the United States. And he's the most colorful general, I guess the most, how do you say that? He's the most decorated general or commander in the history of the U.S. Army. His legend will not fade by his death, but rather at his untimely death, I think it was heightened, and his achievements will be cast in eternal bronze somewhere in Arlington, Virginia. And that's probably where he is buried. I'm guessing. I would like to put $10 on it. Um, but that's just the life of a legendary general. He's made for the big stage, made for the occasion of um, the most the most critical situations during World War II, and he made the most of his of every situation that he was put in. So hats off to this guy, to this big swinging dick, Mr. Patton. And usually we refer to these types of personalities as like assholes or um, just nothing too kind and with regard. Kind of like a modern day Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, in their slave driving behavior to their employees or to their subordinates. But you know, in the military, this is what it takes to win the war. So at a time like that, because of Patton, and because of the right decisions, as well as the he didn't hesitate on his attacks. He executed with 100% conviction. He probably saved a lot of lives. So yeah, with all that, thank you, Mr. Patton, and you were actually remembered all around the world, even by the Germans and by the defeated Allies. So yeah, you have you did not leave any regrets behind, and we are indebted to you as well as to all the soldiers who have fought and or fallen um, in in all the wars that has that has defended the country. And that's all for today's book review. So I'm signing off. Adios.